Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
In our research, one of the things that has come up again and again are murders that are so similar they could be connected, but ultimately aren't. They happen in the same area, have victims who are eerily similar, and the methods and motives seem connected. So connected, investigators have to consider that the same person committed all the crimes. More often than not, it turns out that these crimes are not committed by the same person, which is all the more concerning. Serial killers are one thing, but the idea that several victims could be killed or raped by different people using similar methods is even more terrifying. Such is the case of several crimes, including 2 murders that happened in Garden Grove, California in 1976 and 1977. Both of the murders happened to young women who were just beginning their lives, and many of the details, including the victims' lives themselves, overlapped. But in the end, they were murdered by different people. The effect of these murders on the victims, their loved ones, and the community at large can't be ignored. In this, the first of a 2-part series in which we share with you the details of these murders in Garden Grove and how they were solved, we cover the murder case of Janet Stallcup. Welcome to this episode of California True Crime. I'm your host for this episode, Jessica. With me are Charles and Sean. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Doing good.
I first learned of the murder of Janet Stallcup last year when news hit that after 45 years, investigators had used DNA to finally solve her murder. When I looked into the murder, what I found was a series of crimes, including rape and other murders at the time, that investigators believed could have been connected. Several of the crimes that were possibly connected are still unsolved, but honestly, there was a lot of circumstantial evidence at the time to believe that a connection was entirely plausible. In the end, the murders were not connected, and in fact, one of them was committed by 2 spree killers, but all of these crimes had a large effect on Garden Grove, California. They also happened over a short period of time, so this caused a lot of fear in the families and in young women of the area. So when deciding to do an episode on Janet Stallcup, I didn't feel it made sense to just cover one of the murders and not the other. But I also didn't want to make it confusing by covering all of them in one episode. To give you a better idea of why police looked at all of the murders and rapes as connected, and to understand how that would affect people living in the area at the time, I'm going to give you the details of all the murders over 2 separate episodes. So these 2 episodes will basically cover murders that happened in a very specific period in Garden Grove from December 1976 to January 1977, but it will happen in 2 separate episodes. So essentially separate crimes that we'll see a lot of overlap with.
Just to clarify, though, Jessica, even though they're geographically similar and there's a lot of overlap in as far as the victims and how they were killed, these murders are not perpetrated by the same person, correct?
Correct, yeah. There will be a ton of overlap, and we'll talk about them as we cover the investigation by police, but they are committed by separate people. For this episode, I use newspapers throughout Southern California. This is a pretty heavily covered case in the area. It becomes an unsolved case for 45 years, and there isn't a lot of coverage past the initial crime coverage, and it's only local newspapers covering it. So this might be a crime that people in this area remember or heard about, but it didn't get national attention. You can find the resources for this episode on our page at californiatruecrime.com. In 1976, Janet Stallcup was 19 years old and living in Garden Grove, California. This is a place that I'm not sure I've actually been to. Have you guys or know anything about it or anything you want to share?
I've been there. When it's right by Disneyland, so we'd stay there a lot or stay right next to it. And the other thing I'd remember is Sublime has a song. I can't remember if it's actually called Garden Grove, but they talk about it.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the only thing that I might have gone through it as a kid. Maybe going to Disneyland or Knott's Berry Farm as a small kid.
Garden Grove is in Orange County. It's a county known for things like the TV show The OC, as you guys said, for Disneyland and Knott's Berry Farm, and the 40 miles of coast on the Pacific Ocean. Garden Grove doesn't share any coastline. It's west of the ocean and sits below Anaheim. Orange County is a heavily populated county with over 3 million people living there now. In 1980, just a few years after this crime happened, the population is about 1.9 million people. This is important for this episode and the next because even though the crimes happen in specific places, Garden Grove is intimately tied to the cities around it. Orange County has a big population, but it's actually a small county by area, and there are places where if you're driving, you may not even realize you've moved from one city to the next. Garden Grove's history is really similar to that of other towns we've covered, and much of Orange County was rural and agriculture was big here. In the 1950s, Garden Grove became one of the fastest growing cities in America. The population of just Garden Grove in 1976, where this crime first occurred, was somewhere between 121,000 and 123,000 people. And it's also known for a lot of things like its annual Strawberry Festival.
So for a community in the 70s, it is a substantial community within Orange County.
It is. It's a big city and it's surrounded by large cities. Stallcup had graduated from Garden Grove High School and was living with a roommate in an apartment on Dale Street near Catella Avenue in Garden Grove. I'm always really interested in where everything is and how that looks. I like having addresses and a general idea of where the events happen. We'll have maps on our site of all these areas if you are someone who's also interested in those specifics. The newspapers at the time actually give her address as a couple of locations. One of the ones that if you were to go back and look through the newspaper articles, you'd see a Palmwood Drive address in Garden Grove. But after researching, I believe this is where her family lived at the time. So she is living in this apartment on Dale Street.
About how close is that to her family?
It's just a few miles away. Garden Grove is really suburban. When you look at a map, especially where this crime happens, it's just a mass of houses broken up by schools, parks, and shopping centers. And I know there are a lot of cities like this, but it's always good to have an idea of what this area is like. And this is really your typical California suburb with just a mass of residential areas. And this will be really important when it comes to police trying to solve this crime. The oldest of 3 children, Stallcup was in her second year of nursing school at Cypress College in Cypress, California. This was about a 16 to 17 minute drive northwest from where she lived. She also worked part-time at UCI Medical College in Irvine, California. This would be in the opposite direction of Cypress College, but it's an example of the connection between all of these cities in the area. At about 8:30 p.m. on Sunday, December 19th, 1976, Stallcup left her house to attend a Christmas party at the home of a coworker who lived near Garden Grove in Santa Ana. It was a cold winter night. According to the weather almanac, the mean temperature was about 63 degrees Fahrenheit, or 17 degrees Celsius for non-US listeners, and it was even colder as the night went on. That night, she was wearing polyester slacks with a brown blouse, an ultra suede coat with fake fur, and a pair of sandals. She left her apartment building and got in her 1962 white Ford Falcon and left her house. This was the last time anyone she knew had seen or heard from her, and she never made it to the Christmas party. That night, at approximately 2:30 a.m., Janet Stallcup's roommate called the Stallcup family, worried because she never returned to the apartment. The family will call police, but it isn't until December 24th that police asked the public for assistance, looking for answers in Stallcup's disappearance. That's about 5 days later.
I do find it interesting that the roommate, she's a young woman, And the roommate actually calls the parents at 2:30 a.m., like really like policing how she acts. She went to a Christmas party. She's a young woman. It is the 70s. I didn't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Like how she's not home. I have to call her parents because what if she's, it's just the worst case scenario thinking right then, I felt like.
Well, I wonder too if that's in character or out of character for Jan. They may have had that relationship of, hey, I'm going to be home tonight, or it was out of character for her not to be home.
Right.
Yeah, I can only think when I first moved out, I moved in with a friend of mine who I'd known since kindergarten. And I think along the same lines, we knew our families very well as well. So, we always made sure we knew what time we were coming home just as a protection for each other. So I think this is kind of along those same lines. She knows she's supposed to be home. And, maybe she knows the family well enough to quickly give them a call and see if she's even there with them, perhaps. So initially, when Stallcup goes missing, it seems there is little to no information about how she went missing or her possible whereabouts. And it isn't just her that's missing. Her car is also missing. Her car hasn't been found parked in the parking lot at her apartment, and it isn't outside the friend's home. It isn't at her parents' home. And that's a huge piece of evidence, that vehicle, that police could use to say, it's at the apartment, but there's no Stallcup. So she's obviously, something has happened to her. But without that vehicle, it's difficult for them to know what's happened. Has she been kidnapped? Has she been in an accident somewhere along the route? Has she decided, like you said, Sean, to maybe, she's a single woman, she's an adult, to just go on vacation or go do something else?
Stayed over at somebody else's house.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think we've seen it before in other cases that we've looked at, or even some of the ones that we've listened to or read in other places. But that car being such a repository for potential evidence as well. If she was found, or if the car was found with blood on the seats or broken window or slashed tire or something, that would give the police an idea of where to point. But if there's no Stallcup and no car.
The night that Stallcup went missing, she was on her way to a party at a coworker's house. This home was near Bristol Street and Garden Grove Freeway in Santa Ana. This would be approximately a 19-mile drive. Both Santa Ana and Garden Grove are clustered together in this same area, but one of the biggest issues in trying to find Stallcup is if she was taken or hurt by someone along that path. 19 miles isn't long to get to, 20-minute drive to your friend's house, but it's a lot of terrain to cover for police. And they are hoping that someone in the public might have seen something on the night of the 19th. Investigators give the public information about Stallcup, including how she looked. When she went missing in 1976, she was 5 feet, 10 inches tall, 135 pounds with blue eyes and auburn hair that in pictures released at the time was long, below her shoulders and parted in the middle. Stallcup is Caucasian. She was also wearing glasses in one of the photos. Her car was white and in mint condition. It was a Ford Falcon, as we said. And her parents believed that it should have stuck out to people, that they would maybe remember it because it's a Ford Falcon. The license plate was GVP 193. Police say they are interviewing her acquaintances, people who lived in her apartment complex, and they're also broadcasting a nationwide alarm. Her family is also asking the public for help. Her father, James Stallcup, tells the press that, quote, she was happy in school, happy at work, had no boyfriend trouble or nothing. I'm so convinced that she met up with some foul play somewhere. Her family does not believe she left on her own. That's not in her character. There's also no reason to kidnap her for ransom, though it doesn't sound like that has come up at all. They certainly haven't heard from anyone requesting a ransom. Her family does everything they can to get together a $5,000 reward for information leading to her discovery. And this is not easy for them, and I'm reminded that most families would be in this same boat. Rewards are really important to getting tips. There have been a lot of cases where the higher the reward, the more it can mean in tips. Obviously, that's kind of a double-edged sword for police because a lot of tips means, they have to go through a lot of more information. But now there are a variety of ways to get money for tips. The state will sometimes pitch in, local governments will pitch in But we're still seeing a variety in the amount of money for different kinds of victims in these cases. But at this time, it really seems like it's up to the family to come up with this money. And they're a working class family. Her dad works at Albertsons, and they're desperately trying to find their daughter.
Yeah, and $5,000 is a lot of money. And
Yeah.
for that family to get that amount, quickly to hopefully to entice on just the off chance that somebody might see something is a tremendous deal.
As the police comb through tips, they also send every officer, including cadets, to search through Garden Grove. These officers are put into teams and tasked with searching apartment complexes, shopping centers, everywhere in town for Stallcup and her car. We've covered a couple of cases where people go missing or a weapon goes missing, and much of that has happened in rural or wilderness areas. There are big obstacles to finding things in those areas, but that's also true in cities and suburban areas like Garden Grove. This is a place that is a mass of homes, apartment complexes, garages, side streets, just shopping complexes, places where there are kind of like nooks and crannies where you could hide a car even and not notice it.
Well, too, I think that counteracts that image and I know we've talked a lot about it. So if you listen to this, you're going to hear us say this all the time, but it's not like we see in the movies. I think of that massive search effort of people, and it's usually, like you said, Jessica, it's in the wilderness, or it's in a forest somewhere, or it's on a open plain. The idea of having all of these police officers and cadets searching a town, going through people's garage or knocking on doors, going through garages, culverts or alleyways or overhangs or drainage ditches or anything to look for is just not something I normally associate with a police search. But it makes way more sense that you would need, even probably more people for urban area.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons we continue to see not just police who kind of spend all day driving around and seeing all the areas in a town you might be able to hide something, but also realtors, although that doesn't come into play here. But I just like that realtors are always involved in this stuff.
No, but it does make sense in an urban setting why, and thinking back to why we oftentimes do. I mean, it's become kind of a joke with us as we're researching and seeing realtors helping out, but it does make sense that they have a really good understanding of homes and streets, almost like taxi drivers, I would imagine, or public transportation workers, that they're willing to lend their expertise in helping out. Oh, here's a place to look, or here's the abandoned houses, or hey, I'm in these areas. I know what's normal, what's not normal.
On Monday, December 27th, 1976, a police cadet was searching an apartment complex at 13111 Yawkey Street. At about 10:40 a.m., this officer found Janet Stallcup's car. According to the newspaper, the white Ford Falcon was parked behind a concrete wall behind the apartment complex and partially hidden from view. Inside the vehicle was Stallcup. She was sitting in the front seat, I believe in the passenger seat. Stallcup was nude but covered by a jacket. The car was less than 2 miles from where she lived and just a few miles from her family's home. Police say that the vehicle could have been in this apartment's parking lot the entire time that Stallcup was missing. According to them, it's behind a concrete wall and kind of backed up behind other walls and hidden from view. It isn't immediately clear how Stallcup was murdered or what had caused her death. She had no visible wounds on the body and no clear signs of a sexual attack. This, of course, is on first look of the investigators. They have to perform an autopsy to find out more information. Investigators also tell the public that they suspect she didn't make it very far from her apartment before she was abducted or came into contact with whoever harmed her. Stallcup's parents also meet with reporters to update the reward money they've put forward. This was initially money to find their daughter, but now they're changing that reward so it will go towards information leading to their daughter's killer, and it's the same amount, $5,000. They have this press conference on December 28th, the day after their daughter is found. The picture that accompanies the article in the newspaper is of both Stallcup's parents sitting at a folding table. They're in front of a stone wall, a small microphone in front of them, and a picture of their daughter sitting on the table and facing the press. They answer questions, and it's a reminder how difficult handling the press is, especially during a time like this when they've spent a week dealing with their missing daughter, and now they have to emotionally handle that she's been murdered, and they also have to talk to the press. But the police don't have a lot of information or evidence in this case, and that will continue, despite them finding the car and Stallcup. They really need public tips, and money helps that, but so does putting a face to these crimes. This is what this press conference does, and we've talked about crimes that do or don't get a lot of attention, and one of the things we've noticed is that a lot of crimes that get a lot of coverage have family members who are willing to speak to the press. Researching this and seeing that photo and thinking about this family, it brings up how ill-prepared I think just everyday people are to do this, especially in the 70s when we know, based on other episodes, police are still getting used to the whole press situation and advising people.
Yeah, the idea of having a media liaison for a police department or somebody to help the parents talk to the media isn't even a thought in 76. I think we really see that more with the rise of the 24-hour news cycle on social media, but I think the first time we really talked about it a lot was with the Steven Stainer case, so I don't think anybody can put themselves in that position unless you've had to live through that. The awfulness of having to deal with your own personal grief, and then on top of which go out in public and talk to the media and answer a bunch of the same kind of questions. And that picture, and we will have that on our website at californiatruecrime.com. That picture is rough to look at, knowing that they, 24 hours earlier, they found their daughter.
On top of the $5,000 put forward by the family, the secret witness program through the Independent Press Telegram newspaper in Long Beach puts forward another $2,000 for information leading to an arrest. Also, a 24-hour phone number is set up so people can call in with tips. When the official autopsy is finished, the information gleaned from that process finds that the cause of death was a broken neck. There isn't specific information given as to how or exactly in what way this happened, but in updates to the case throughout the years, the newspaper and police will say that she was strangled. Stallcup was also sexually assaulted, which is also believed to be the motive for the crime. One very confusing thing is that the autopsy sets the day of death as approximately December 22nd, 1976, or about 5 days prior to her being found. She went missing on the 19th, so this means that there are a few days unaccounted for, and more tests are run to pinpoint a more exact time of death. But this is concerning and could mean that she was held somewhere else before she was found. And this gap is important to the investigation for a couple of reasons. Police have found the car and the victim, but if there are other places in which a crime took place, including a place she was held, finding that place is essential to getting evidence. While police are sifting through tips, they're also looking closely at another crime that happened in November of 1976. According to police, on November 17th, another woman who lived in the same apartment complex as Stallcup was abducted by two men outside that complex and raped by them at gunpoint. Stallcup knew, quote unquote, knew the victim. I don't think they never used the word friend or anything like that, but someone, lives in her apartment complex. There was an acquaintance. This crime will become very important for police, and they believe it could be connected to the Stallcup case. And this brings up an issue that we should remember when police are investigating. In the Stallcup case, they don't have any information about when she was taken or how, but they have this not dissimilar horrible crime that happened in the exact same spot where she may have disappeared. This is reminiscent of the Denise Lampy case, in which you have a murder in Daly City, and its details are so similar to several other murders in the area, but that area is a lot more spread out than here. It's basically a county. This is a crime that happened possibly in the same exact spot. Investigators find no evidence that whoever hurt Stallcup is someone she knew, so you already have this unlikely crime of a stranger or strangers kidnapping her, and then what are the odds that a few weeks earlier, another woman is kidnapped by strangers in that exact same place? Police can't get too focused in that unless there's evidence connecting the crimes, but you also don't want to miss what could be something that's right in front of you. So there's this strategic aspect to investigating that I think we don't talk about enough.
Especially when you don't, as you said a few times, you don't have any evidence. You don't have anything really. I mean, you have a body, sort of the time of death. You know the mode of death, and but there's no smoking gun, as it were. There's not a definite direction to look for a suspect. So I think it makes perfect sense why a police department would say, "Oh yeah."
On December 31st, 1976, funeral services were held for Janet Stallcup at Forest Lawn Memorial Park and Cypress Cemetery at 10:30 a.m. On this same day, police also tell the public about two men they consider possible suspects. At this stage in the investigation, they don't give information on why they suspect these two men, but they do say that the information came from a witness. They also don't give information about the witness because it could put that witness in jeopardy, and the witness is really terrified and scared to come forward. On top of a description, they also give out two composites of the possible suspects. These facial composites were made using feature-based selection. So instead of talking with a trained artist to create a picture of what's in your memory, the witness will look at pictures of different features one at a time, and then put all of those pics together like a puzzle and create the composite. So you're looking at noses separately and then eyes, and you're trying to pick out which ones you remember and then putting all of those. And the composites, you can kind of really tell. They'll be on our website as well. Once you know that and you see they have like the same expression almost, you can kind of realize that it's a whole different thing. And I have to wonder if these are even accurate or useful to police.
I tried to look some of that stuff up because I look at some of these and it's like, what? And it's kind of out of control. Like there's this one that I looked up, Michael Hamburger from 1988. And to me, it doesn't look like anything to his picture. To me, though. But I looked up a lot of it, tried to find more things on it. And there's like this one artist named Lois Gibson. And she's like famous she was out of the Texas area. And it's funny, she has a quote that says, "This is the only art I know of that you can do it pretty bad, goofy, sloppy, but if you catch the person, it becomes perfect." And I thought that was interesting because she was even saying that 3 out of the 10 sketches that she does catches. And that was about around 2004. The percentage of composite drawings is about 30% useful. To me, it almost, some of them, when you put the drawing next to the person, sure, then you can go, oh, look, they look alike. But when you don't know the person and you just see the drawing or how you put it, like putting it together, it can look like so many people. And then, you can get worried that you're going to get called out because this guy kind of looks like you.
Well, one or two, if that has to do with the idea that most of us look at those drawings and have no context to the place and the time that those drawings were done, versus somebody who lives in the area, that drawing is a representation, not to be an identical match. So, yeah, it could look like anybody, but if I think about that drawing and I'm driving down somewhere in Garden Grove, would that drawing trigger a memory of, oh, I did see somebody that kind of looked like that outside that apartment, or I did see the white Ford Falcon, but it was driven by this other looking guy, or two people, or whatever. It's that facial recognition, that thing that humans are good at patterns, recognizing certain types of patterns.
Especially nowadays, maybe not back then so much, but it's like a composite comes out and then it's flooded. Everyone's trying to be the hero almost and trying to solve a case, and they're thinking it's anyone that they might know. You get on any social media and it's like a news article about a car accident and then 20 different comments. What kind of car was it? Like they're going to know everyone. It's that everyone's trying to put themselves into it. So when you have this composite could be General Sam and General Jenny or whatever, and it looks like anyone, 1 out of 10 people it could be, and then you just get a lot of tips and a lot of false accusations.
one could argue that if it is generating tips, though, that's a good thing. Even if they're false, it's still more data. It's still more points that a police officer can track down or run down.
I think on the one hand, I think you're right. You're hoping that someone will see this and see the story and see the composite and think, oh, I know so-and-so, and they might be likely to have committed this crime and they look like this. But I think Sean's also right in that, like, I would always think of the Zodiac composite.
Crew cut and black glasses.
Yeah. And assuming that the person who even, that was even an accurate representation based on witnesses, every time someone comes forward, you're like, oh yeah, that does look like the person. It's just so many people look like this person.
And it's crazy. Like you said, 30-some%, right. Sean,
30%, yeah.
It is amazing that some of those drawings, especially when you see some of the ones that are maybe more crudely drawn, but then there's the whole factor of like you just mentioned, Jessica, the unreliability of eyewitnesses.
Yeah.
You're factoring in that. So even at 30%, I guess it's 30-some% better than you had without it. But it's interesting to see how much technology's changed that with facial recognition software, with the amount of cameras. More and more people are relying on like camera and photographic evidence. If there's still as much need for composite and
I don't know. A lot of that seems pretty difficult to narrow down what someone looks like exactly too.
Right, even on a photograph. I wonder if they bring them in and then match them up.
I'm Paige, the host of Reverie True Crime. I tell stories of helpless victims, vicious killers, predators watching their prey before they strike, survivors, petty crimes, people we think we know who do the unthinkable, and the dangers that lurk not only in the dead of night, but in plain sight in the light of day. Every once in a while, I'll also tell stories of the frightening paranormal, elusive cryptids, haunted locations, and conspiracies that may be silly or thought-provoking. You can listen to Reverie True Crime wherever you're listening to this podcast.
The man given the moniker Suspect Number 1 is described as a white male between the ages of 20 and 24, approximately 5 feet 10 inches, 185 pounds with a round face, quote, frizzy, dirty blonde hair parted in the middle, and armed with a chrome-plated .38 caliber revolver. In the photo, his hair is also about shoulder length. The second man, or suspect number 2, is described as a white male, aged 26 to 28, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds. He is unshaven with light brown kinky hair that was in a small ponytail. In the sketch they release, he also has a small mustache on his face, and his face is more oval and longer than the other suspect. There is also a description of a vehicle they were driving. It was possibly a 1962, 63, or 64 Chevrolet two-door sedan and was white in color and dirty. We will have these descriptions and the composites themselves available on our site at californiatruecrime.com. When the composites are released, they're everywhere. They're in every newspaper in the area and, of course, on local television. Flyers are also put up. After the composites are released, police are inundated with so many tips that the telephone switchboard becomes jammed. They have to go through these hundreds of tips and prioritize them. This is a long process, but they praise the public's response and willingness to help. Though they do say that some of the tips are on the odder end of things, which we know from past episodes. They have to go through them all. They're very focused on her apartment complex and trying to find where she may have been held during the 2 to 3 days before she was murdered. On January 6, 1977, the Stallcup family printed a letter under the Special Notices section in the Classifieds of the Santa Ana Register to thank the public for all their, quote, help, prayers, and concerns. They also say they're really grateful for the way they've been treated by police and the media. I think this is a really important part because we've covered some cases where the media hasn't treated people really well, so it's good to highlight the ones where they are treated well. This is a case that's heavily, it's not super heavily covered, but pretty covered in the area, but it's not the kind of case where I think reporters are camped out on their lawns or digging through their trash. And that's possibly because there's zero evidence that police have that she's hurt by family or friends or someone she knows.
Yeah, on the surface, it's not necessarily a real salacious story, too. But the fact that it's just a local woman gone missing and then found murdered.
On January 18th, the reward money in this case is increased by $5,000 to a total of $12,000 when an anonymous donor adds to the fund. This increase in money plus the composites mean even more tips. Not much else is shared with the public about this case until Friday, January 21st, 1977. At noon on that Friday, a 20-year-old woman named Laura Ann Stoughton was found murdered in a remote area in Orange, California. This area was referred to as Orange Villa Park, and she was found on top of a hill by a motorcyclist. She had been shot multiple times, and a rosary was clutched in her hands. Investigators believe she was kidnapped outside her Garden Grove home at 2 a.m. earlier that morning. These two crimes will ultimately be unrelated, but for a time at the end of January 1977, it becomes very possible that they are related, and both the media and police are investigating that possibility. There isn't specific physical evidence to connect them. As far as the 1970s are concerned, there isn't much physical evidence in Janet Stallcup's murder in general. But there are commonalities that investigators can't ignore. 8 investigators from Orange, California, interview 40 to 50 people to find any connection between the two victims. Right away, there are differences. The method of murder being one. Stallcup was strangled and Stoughton was shot. The second is the possible motive. The motive in the Stallcup crime is believed to be rape, and the motive in the Stoughton crime is believed to be robbery. But there are similarities in the victimology. It's believed both women were kidnapped, possibly both from outside their home. They're both around the same age, and in fact, both of them attended Garden Grove High School and just graduated a year apart, Stallcup in 75 and Stoughton in 74. In fact, the victims lived only a few blocks from each other when they were kids. They weren't friends, but they were acquaintances. They both also lived in Garden Grove. They were both attractive, and they do look kind of similar. Both victims have their purses missing, and that's the first time actually that we learned that Stallcup has her purse missing. And they have both recently taken rape defense courses, and oddly, but probably not connected, both their last names start with an ST. When you think about the coincidences here, mixed with the fact that Stallcup also was acquainted with the rape victim in November of 1976, this all starts to look very connected and very concerning, even though no physical evidence connects them at all. And you can see why this is something that police are looking at.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy that there's so many coincidences, especially just the knowing or being acquaintances. It's not like it's a small town. We talked about that earlier, that it's a large area. So to have these similarities is it's pretty eerie.
Well, and then the fact that they're only a couple of blocks away, they both took the same class, and then this coupled with the other earlier crime that happened right at the same apartment complex. Yeah, I'm with you guys. It's 100% understandable why police would start. There's all of these dots. It seems like they all should be connected.
Police also start looking at other crimes. They find a murder of a woman named Robin Cox that happened on January 12th in her home. This is, as far as I know, still an unsolved crime, and we'll share details in our cold case at the end of this episode about that. But that victim shares similarities. She worked and spent time in the same area as Stoughton. She lived in Costa Mesa, which is just a short distance away in Orange County. So police are looking at several cases. And this is 1970s. We talked about Santa Cruz in 1970s. This is 1970s in Southern California. And while a lot of the more famous or well-known serial killers are just about to strike in the area, the paper is filled with some very harrowing crimes and several other murders that aren't connected to the ones that we're going to be covering. The possibility that Stoughton and Stallcup's murders are connected only lasts a few days, because at the end of January, police find Stoughton's purse in a culvert and are able to connect her murder with several other murders, all of which have nothing to do with Janet Stallcup. They pretty quickly arrest 2 men for those crimes. They're referred to as spree killings, and we will cover that crime and all of the crimes connected to it in our second Garden Grove episode. While the Stoughton crime is solved, Janet's Stallcup murder remains unsolved and seems to go cold. In 1979, investigators talk with the press in an attempt to revitalize the case, and in doing so, they give more information on the crime itself. They do this because one of their worries now is something we talked a little bit about earlier. They're concerned that in 1976 and 77, when police investigated the case, that they focused too much on the composites and descriptions of the 2 men. From a research perspective, the majority of the articles are about those 2 men, and they become a huge focus, especially because there isn't any other information about this crime. Investigators now say the composites for the 2 men came from the victim of the earlier rape in November 1976, the one who was kidnapped outside of Stallcup's apartment building. If you remember at that time, these composites are released. The police say they came from a witness, and to protect that witness, they aren't giving any information on how the person was a witness or who they were. So it's never emphasized to the public prior to 1979 that the composites are from an earlier crime. This witness didn't see Stallcup kidnapped or witness that crime at all.
But it makes sense why the police would use that witness's statement as or phrase it in that way. I mean, this woman had been raped at gunpoint, practically, at the same apartment complex.
And they had nothing else.
Right.
So they needed something. It makes sense.
And the woman would be, I can't even imagine what would be going through her mind that, she managed to live through one horrible assault, and that the next person that this happened to at the same apartment complex died. I can imagine she'd be frightened out of her mind.
Yeah, I think even just dealing with her own crime, she was kidnapped in November at gunpoint by 2 men and then had a horrible crime committed against her. So even the fact that she's able to give or look at composites or put together a composite is pretty amazing. But it's understandable that she doesn't want anyone to know who she is or where the information came from. But it is a double-edged sword, because if police don't give this information and it turns out to be important, then that comes back on them. And if they don't look at it, and they never tell the public that this is the only information that matters. But I can see why they're worried about this looking back, that maybe there are tips that, someone didn't call in because it didn't fit the composites.
But I think you just said it, Sean. The idea is that in lieu of anything else, this is what we have to go on. So we have to make the best strategic plan for how to solve this case. That makes sense. Hindsight is always 20/20, and you want to make sure that you can rectify those, in this case, not mistake, but maybe misstep.
Yeah, that's the worry in 1979 when they're looking back and trying to get information, is that releasing these composites may have stifled tips. Of course, we know police got lots of tips, but they seem to mainly be about these 2 men. If you were someone who saw something or heard something, but the thing you saw or heard didn't have to do with these 2 men, you may have discounted it. So police think it's possible that by stressing, putting an emphasis on these 2 composites, they lost out on information, and now they're hoping to rectify that and asking people to come forward. As far as I can tell, and I have sent an email, but haven't received a response on that November rape. I don't even think it's something that could be brought a case against now. But as far as I know, that crime is still unsolved. In 1979, investigators say that there's actually been other similar crimes with similar descriptions for 2 men committing those kinds of rapes and kidnappings in and around Southern California, and they still haven't been caught in 79. During this interview with police, there's also new and terrible information given regarding the murder of Janet Stallcup. One of those things is the location of where Stallcup and her car were found. According to detectives, her car was not in a location that was out of sight or hidden as thoroughly as earlier reports suggested. In fact, they say it seems very implausible that someone, even several people, didn't see the vehicle. They say the car was parked in the complex, and there would have been cars parked around it, people coming and going. And there isn't really a reason, at least to them, why people wouldn't have seen the car, wouldn't have seen Stallcup inside on the front seat, and wouldn't have been able to call police.
And we actually, the apartment complex is still there. We looked up using Google Earth and Street Views. You can see it pretty clearly, the parking lot around the structure too. And the area, there's not really, with the exception of the covered parking spaces, there's not a place where any car in that parking area would be totally sequestered or out of the way.
And when we first talked about this, when you first brought this up, Jessica, this was something I couldn't get out of my head. Thinking about a woman sitting in a car with a jacket on and people are just going by her, and I thought about it, but it's kind of strange because we just last episode talked about the murder of Marcy Conrad and how kids saw the body and they didn't say anything. And is this the same kind of feel? Do you feel?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible. That, there's a lot of reasons why people wouldn't come forward, or, fear, as we talked about in that episode, that they would be blamed or not wanting to get involved. So I think that's entirely possible. I do agree that, at least based on what we see now, it doesn't look like there's a place where you couldn't hide a car, although there were a couple of locations where maybe it wouldn't be as
visible.
Noticeable.
There's like the back corner of the parking lot that if you didn't, like we talked about it, in apartment complexes we've all lived in, usually the covered spaces are assigned and the uncovered are unassigned. Well, depending on what that looked like in mid 70s, currently in 2022, when this is being recorded, there are the furthest away from the building are the uncovered ones. So it's theoretically, it would be possible in the back corner that a car that nobody would park next to it.
And then we saw how, like, where the apartments were, their windows were pointing straight to the parking lot. So if there was that angle and you just see that, I mean, it's a hard situation. I wasn't there, so I have no clue.
Yeah.
But it's just making all these what ifs in our head is just because of how the situation played out. It seems weird.
I think in the original articles, there was mention that people, that some people probably could see the car from their apartment, certain apartments, but that still would have been difficult. I don't know why this information is different. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about another murder that will have a very similar issue where police give information that turns out to be not correct later. I don't know why that's happening, if it's a miscommunication or if police are, it's heartbreaking to think that Janet Stallcup was in her car for so many days and no one came forward. That's heartbreaking just to think about her as a victim, but also for her family. So maybe police didn't want to share everything they had, or, maybe it's just new people looking back and having a different understanding, but it will come up in our next episode in an entirely different case. So it's just an interesting
That's what
aspect.
I was wondering is if it was not a safety mechanism, but a conscious choice by the police department to say we're going to spare her family the knowledge that their daughter went unclaimed or basically sitting out in public for 5 days before she was found. But I still think it's a weird choice to make. I mean,
well, longer than that, really.
Right.
And I will say that the information that, and what I'm about to tell you guys, that we also find out in 1979, and there's similar information for next episode, it's all very difficult to hear, and information that, I can understand police not wanting to share with the public or even with family. Whatever the reason, that people didn't come forward, Sean, as you were saying, the police now need people to come forward. Just helping to establish a timeline could be so important. The other information that comes from these articles is that investigators in 1979 also believed that the car had been there basically since Stallcup went missing on December 19th. which brings up the question about the time of death and the possibility she was held. Investigators in 79 are working under the assumption that both the car and the victim were there the whole time. They believe that during her sexual assault, Stallcup was left, quote, partially paralyzed, meaning it may have taken her some time to pass away after she was attacked and strangled. It's impossible to know how long that took because the car was locked up and the weather was cold, so that would change time of death. And they believe that the weather, December weather, slowed decomposition as well. So they don't have a specific time of death, but they do believe that she had been there since she went missing. Police interview many suspects over the years, including ones from out of state, but they never seem to find a good connection or link to the area at the time of the crime. They also interviewed registered sex offenders and parolees in the area. That's something we've seen before. The only physical evidence they have in the 1970s is a pack of chewing gum, and they don't say whether that was hers or perhaps someone who kidnapped her. The clothes that Stallcup was wearing at the time, an extra pair of shoes found in her back seat, and semen from the rape. Semen in the 1970s can be used to find blood type, and they do that. I don't see that shared with the public. Unfortunately, they don't share what evidence they have, if they have any other evidence in this case, but as time moves forward, the evidence, the semen evidence in particular, becomes more important. This case remains unsolved until July 14th, 2021. Almost 45 years after Janet Stallcup was murdered, it was announced that investigators were able to use that DNA to name a suspect. The suspect they named was a man named Terry Dean Hawkins, and he's a suspect that could have only been named in 2021 because not only did police use DNA to find him, they used genetic genealogy. So in 2012, the Orange County Crime Lab used the semen to find a DNA profile that matched a single male. At that time, they run it through CODIS, but they were unable to find a match. In 2020, they opened a genetic genealogy file and began looking for a match that way. One of the reasons they had to use this method, is also the reason there were no arrests with this announcement. Terry Dean Hawkins died in jail just a few months after Stallcup was murdered in July of 1977. Normally, the DNA sample they had of Hawkins would have been put together around the 90s or in 2012 and run through the offender database. Assuming Hawkins had continued his life of criminality, he would have been in the system and he would have matched. He unfortunately died before that was possible. You've probably heard of genetic genealogy. It's the technique behind finding the Golden State Killer and solving many other cases in the last couple of years. It's also a big reason many they-dos have been identified around the country. Mixed with new DNA techniques, this is a new way of solving crimes using DNA and finding partial matches in genealogical databases. Interestingly, here they were able to use tissue from Hawkins' autopsy in 1977 to test the sample against. Terry Dean Hawkins lived and worked in Garden Grove at the time of the murder. He was a mechanic with a history of criminality. Those crimes included a DUI, indecent exposure, drug charges, and weapons charges. He had also been arrested for murder in 1975, but never convicted and was released due to unknown circumstances. There is little to no detail on that crime, but what I can tell you is that Hawkins was arrested for the drowning of a woman from Westminster, California, named Guadalupe McClellan, who was 40 years old. She was found face down in a creek bed near Canada Road and the Santa Ana Freeway. Except for a knit sweater, she was nude. Hawkins was arrested for the crime, but let go. Whatever connection he had to McClelland is unknown to the public. I've been trying to find out if this is still an unsolved crime. There's literally a tiny paragraph about it in the newspaper. I don't know what happened with this victim. I'm trying to find out more information. I've contacted the Westminster Police to see if there is more information, if they're still looking for the murderer, or if it's just assumed that it's Hawkins, but hopefully we can get you a resolution. On July 4th of 1977, police arrested Hawkins at the beach in Newport Beach at 9:39 p.m. for being under the influence of drugs. On July 5th, 1977, Hawkins ate dinner and went back to his cell. At 8:35 p.m., when they tried to get him up, they found him deceased. Paramedics were called, and they tried to revive him for about 30 minutes before taking him to UCI Medical Center. He was pronounced dead from undetermined causes. At the time of his death, he was 26 years old and lived on Russell Avenue in Garden Grove, just less than 2 miles from where his victim, Janet Stallcup, was found. He is also buried in Forest Lawn Memorial Cemetery. This is a very difficult case, and one that will unfortunately not have more light shed on it because Hawkins is deceased. You guys have any other questions or comments?
Yeah, it just doesn't feel right because you technically know years later, probably family, unless Janet had younger siblings or maybe just siblings. No one really gets that resolution either, like her parents. And it's just weird because sure, you find out, but you don't find out why. You don't find out how this happened. You just know that he died right after, and it's just a strange, odd thing, but it doesn't feel like closure at all.
No, I agree. I think, it's a tragic story all the way around, but the idea that as they were looking for their daughter's killer, he was dying in prison, there's no justice for anyone in this.
Janet Stallcup was just 19 years old when her life was cut short by a man whose short criminal history points to at least one more victim and possibly many more had he not died in 1977. Stallcup was a hard worker who cared about her family and others. She wanted to be a nurse and work with children. She had such an effect on those that knew her that a memorial fund was set up by her friends after she was found murdered. They wanted to honor her wishes to help children by raising money for the Children's Hospital in Orange, California. All the donations were earmarked to buy equipment to help with child patients. The community of Garden Grove stepped up to donate to the fund, something you can see in the donations the hospital received. It got donations as high as $100, but it received a lot of $10 ones from people in the community giving whatever they could. The 1970s, regardless of where we covered in California, is filled with horror stories. But it's worth a reminder that even in the midst of these horrible crimes, there is light. Janet Stallcup is a reminder of that, as well as her loved ones and the community of Garden Grove who helped make one of her last acts one born of kindness. Here with our cold case is Sean.
On Wednesday, January 12th, 1977, 20-year-old Robin Cox was murdered inside her apartment at 241 Avocado Street in Costa Mesa, California. Robin was a waitress at Coco's restaurant who lived with a roommate who found her face down in their bathtub. An autopsy concluded that she had been strangled. There was no sign of struggle in the apartment. Cox was known to spend time on MacArthur Boulevard, an area of Orange County known as a hot spot. There isn't a lot of publicity known about Cox. She was 5'2" tall and 107 pounds. She was single and had no children. She wanted to be a court reporter. If you have any information about the murder of Robin Cox, please call the Costa Mesa Police Department at 714-754-5280.
Thank you for listening to this episode of California True Crime on the Darkcast Network. For a full list of our sources as well as more information on this and all of our cases, head to our webpage at californiatruecrime.com, where you can support the show by joining our Patreon, which has options for ad-free episodes. On our website, we have up and running with some California True Crime merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, and special episode exclusive stickers. If you'd like to contact us, you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cali True Crime. Make sure that you subscribe to our show and to get our latest episodes. Leave us a 5-star review and tell a friend. Get the word out about California True Crime. We'd like to thank our quality control engineer, Melanie Duncan. This was recorded at Snail Ranch Studios and The Hangar.